Yeah, hello, everybody. How are we doing? Woo. Kev, can you hear me all right?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. Perfect. See, it's seamless integration. Oh dear. Uh, 7, actually for this one we don't need to have followers only mode, but that's fine. We can leave that running. Bonnie, how you doing? I see Sumi's in chat. So we have our college eds in chat tonight. But everyone, we've got a little bit special of a stream tonight because I brought in Big Rev Kev. Say hi, Big Rev Kev.
How are you doing? How's everybody doing?
So we're gonna have it's gonna be a little bit more impromptu than it has been before, just because I have a prompt for tonight. And so you guys are going to be the ones that are going to keep us going tonight. And as always, these streams are brought to you in part by alcohol, the Breakfast of Champions, and college students around the world since always. So proofreading and formatting. Ugh. So Kev, Bonnie here is actually one of our resident grad students who is majoring in history. You poor soul, you are going through. Well, Kev, you just went through that, didn't you? You just finished it a year and a half ago, I think. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm still actually working on my thesis, but yeah, I've finished all my graduate work.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I've finished almost all of my graduate work, except for a field historian class and whatever else I need to do for that particular thing. So yeah, it's been a fun time. But yeah, tonight the topic is history in an age of media. So we're gonna be talking about history as it gets depicted in media, and we're gonna, because it's kind of the elephant in the room, we're probably gonna talk a little bit about. I had to get my bossa nova jazz on in the background. I'm sorry. We're probably gonna talk a little bit about that step off point from Vietnam, because everybody loves to talk about that. Whenever they talk about how history and military is depicted in media. So we'll probably talk about that a little bit tonight. And that's actually the step-off prompt that I have. So, Chaotic, I see you here too. Have us on the background. Perfect, fine. That works for me. So, Sumi, yeah, So yeah, Bonnie is currently doing a write-up on the Russo-Japanese War. Gross. Gross. Sumi, feel bad for missing the last 15 minutes. It'll be fine. That's what the VODs are for. But I'll let. That's enough of me rambling here. I'm gonna kind of let Kevin introduce himself, because we have so many Kevins in this community. What do we have? 5 Kevins. You guys are multiplying. So yeah, I guess there's evidence to the fact that the U.S. has the largest concentration of Kevins per capita.
We try to represent the best we can.
The Kevin Corps.
Yes.
Kevin Corps.
So, anyway. Well, introduce myself. So yeah, I'm Kevin, Big Rev Kev, in other words. But yeah, I'm really interested in primarily Civil War, World War I, and World War II. I guess like any U.S. history, military history student. But I have connections, family ties to the World War I and World War II, and Civil War has just always been a passion. So those are my concentrations. Mark's more of the Cold War guy.
Yeah, I'm more of the Catch-22. I think it took me forever to shake off the Air Force fan that doesn't work for the Air Force stigma that was following me around. And I think it still does, because every now and then I keep getting nudged at the office. Hey, you know Air Force, what's this? Contractor did that to us, not about it. Well, I keep feeling displaced because we had that year of COVID. So now I'm just like, well, it was just the other day. No, it wasn't just the other day. It was like a year and then just the other day. But one of the inquiries was about a helicopter. And what's this helicopter? H-21-M3? Yeah, that's what it was. Glad I could help. Helicopters aren't really my thing, but I'm glad I could help you anyway. So yes, as Sumi here says, Sumi is an undergrad, backgrounds and personal experiences in art history and Asian American history. And as I was telling chat, when was this chat? Was this what? I think this might have been our last episode. It was actually the art history side that navigated me over to where I work. So yeah, super cool. But one of the places where I'm actually not super duper strong, I have a bias. We were talking about biases, of course, on, what was it? That was last stream. Yeah. Last stream. We were talking about biases in history, and I recognize I have a bias when it comes to news and media. And its depiction of military and media. So, and that's actually the prompt that I have in front of me. That's somebody, and I always keep these anonymous when they get sent in. But that somebody sent in the contact form on the website that they had a question about our opinions on how media has impacted how history is interpreted, particularly from the Vietnam War. And I'm going to restrain myself from getting on my soapbox, because I have contended for a while that media had a very big role in the results of Vietnam. But what we'll kind of start with tonight is Kev here has done quite a fair amount of looking into World War I and World War II, probably Civil War movies as well. I don't know. You had that one movie night where you did the longest movie.
Yeah.
Is that right? The longest movie?
That's correct. Yes.
I've brought that up a few times, the longest movie, but so I guess I'm going to start with that. So juxtapose from old media. When I say old media, I'm talking actual old. So 1930s, 40s, 50s cinema, juxtaposed to today's things like 1917, Hacksaw Ridge, and Dunkirk. So I figured we would start comparing how those look in contrast to how the older movies looked. Now, I know what my opinion is, and we'll get to my opinion here in a minute, but I'm interested in somebody who actually has studied these a little bit more, because like Kev said, I'm more of a Cold War historian. I'm not a World War era historian by any means, so I'm interested in your take on those.
Well, I mean, there's a huge variety, obviously, in at least in my opinion. It changes fairly dramatically, and I've been doing a lot of work recently in the pre-World War II exercises, and so pre-World War II U.S. Army exercises that took place, and in the build-up to the war, and the nation realizing that we weren't quite ready, or at least the Army and at least part of the federal government realizing that we weren't quite ready for the a coming war. And so, in talking about film in that sense, is that there were think it was 17 films that were made in 1940 about the exercises and about the Army, and about the great things that were happening in this training that were taking place. And some of them actually had fairly, big A-list, actors and comedians, and going into 1941 as well. And it was to the point that, they were almost propaganda films, talking about the virtues of how great this training was, and to the point that Congress actually came out, or several Congress members of Congress, I should say, came out and actually, really were vocal about their opposition to Hollywood, saying, "Hey, you're making propaganda here," but what it was, I think, in a lot of ways, is that, the population or the public were just eating this stuff up. There were these huge exercises that they'd been reading about, and now this was really one of the first times that they were seeing, film footage of what was going on, and in comedies and dramas, and kind of oddball sort of little films. And it's like, and I apologize, I meant to look it up before this, but Abbott and Costello did a little movie with the Andrews sisters, talking about the exercises, and Abbott and Costello get wrangled into basically volunteering to go into the Army, and actually Laurel and Hardy did too. In that sense.
Really?
But, yeah. I think their movie was slightly earlier, but they all, it's basically the same plot. They end up accidentally enlisting and going into the Army and participating in these exercises. And Bob Hope was in a movie about the exercises. His was actually where he was following his boss. His boss was really wealthy, and he wanted to follow him, kind of protect him, and shepherd him through these exercises, or joining the Army.
Sure.
And his premise was that every time he heard gunshots, he would pass out or faint. And so, but anyway,
that's a useful soldier right there.
Yeah, well, it led to a lot of comic effect,
right?
Where, and that really was the intent of some of these films, was to highlight, hey, the seriousness of this, but to add comedy and add a funny side to this. But
Hollywood,
nevertheless, it was. There wasn't really, while the Army welcomed it, they welcomed, and we heard the term during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, embedding media into the military units. Well, this was really that kind of thing, where they were embedding media in Hollywood into these units during these exercises, and allowing them to film, but they weren't really controlling the message so much. And that was Congress's thing, was that they were actually doing investigations, saying, hey, is the Army basically paying you to say what they want you to say? But in the end, it really wasn't. Hollywood was just doing like what reporters would do, and capturing a cool story and profiting off of it.
Right.
But then that all changes, obviously, after December 1941. Then Hollywood goes to war, and they basically get weaponized in making films for all kinds of different things, training films, and feel good films for at home, and then media and that kind of thing. So but that's really a lot of areas where I've focused recently, and in reading about these exercises and the film that came out of that. But going post World War II, you really see, again, this is all my opinion, but
right,
you really see kind of a change where you start seeing some of these hard-hitting films where, like the story of G.I. Joe, which was kind of based upon Ernie Pyle's book, and you start seeing some of these more dramas and hard-hitting stories where the hero didn't always survive, and showing some of these harder tales from the war, whereas you see those during the war, but not quite as much. Like the story of G.I. Joe, I think it was actually came out on film in 1945.
Yeah.
Just shortly after Ernie Pyle's death. But But yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating study looking and seeing how these films progressed over time.
Yeah,
Um,
they all start becoming Russian films where everybody dies.
yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, to borrow from a class where we had a our mutual boss was an instructor of. I did not know that actually about the Abbott and Costello skit and the Andrews sisters. I guarantee you, I probably have a copy of that somewhere.
yeah,
Um, just because my grandmother was a huge fan of the Andrews sisters and literally had like every form of media in some shape, way, or form. So if the Andrews
yeah.
sisters were involved, she had a copy of it. So I'll have to go through some of her stuff. We're still going through all of her estate and see if there's a copy of it. Um, but and it's very interesting. You mentioned that post World War II instance, and the things that come to mind. So the big parade is the World War I component, and I remember sitting through American military and film, which was a great class. It was a fantastic class. I loved that class with every fiber of my being. But I remember how exaggerated. It's a silent film, right? So all of the gestures and motions are extremely exaggerated, and it's to the point where it's comical. To the point to where there's a guy that's basically dying from mustard gas, and he's trying to convey that he's dying from mustard gas, but the way that he's doing it is, in a sense, it's so comical, it's so unbelievable. But I'm removed enough from the silent film era that doesn't strike me the same way that probably would have struck someone in like 1920, 1930, who could remember that era and remember those gestures and know what that means. But then you're talking about things when you're getting to post-World War era, and the things that come to mind for me in particular are things like Hamburger Hill, or The Enemy Below. Those two come to mind, which Enemy Below, I never thought that a submarine battle could be so suspenseful. But somehow they managed to sell that. And then you get the other things, you get the MASH TV shows, you get the Hogan's Heroes and things like that, where they're really trying to inject the comedy. But one of the things that was interesting that you pointed out too is that Hollywood is very much putting out this propaganda then, and so much so that people are like lambasting it and saying that, well, this is propaganda, this is ridiculous. It's very similar to what we hear now, with people having complaints with Hollywood having an agenda and propaganda and things like that they're lacing up. So it's interesting to see those parallels. Now, what I have noticed is that they've changed things from maybe an exaggeration when it comes to comedy, as they might have done in the 1940s, to being more of a drama. And in some cases, there's the obligatory sex appeal kind of thing that Hollywood does today. It's a drama sex appeal apparently today, but back then it was more towards comedy, and I'm not entirely sure what the paradigm shift was there. That's always been a thing that's kind of been interesting to me, and I'd be interested to see if anybody has any psych reports on that to figure out exactly who made that call or who decided that sells so much better than comedy. I tell you right now, I'd be more interested in a comedy show than I would be a drama. But yeah, it's interesting, all these little nuances, and
and I think, Mark, that you see coming out post Vietnam, or Vietnam and post Vietnam, is that you start seeing the film shift the other way, where there's a bunch of these films that, like Kelly's Heroes and Patton. Obviously they're made about World War II, but they, at least as my understanding, is that they were both meant or intended to be anti-war films.
Right.
And so you see Hollywood going the other direction, where instead of being propaganda, in supporting the war effort, now they're taking, what was seen as, the good war and showing the dark side of the good war,
right.
during a war they didn't support.
Yeah, and it's always been one of those things to where, and we talked about this last stream, and I see that Sumi kind of brought it up again here, the issue of fact checking. And one of the things I want to come back to that in just a minute, Sumi. But one of the things that you brought up, and I'm kind of chuckling in my mind right now because I seem to remember a comic that was put out, I believe, actually in PS Magazine. I have to go and look and see if I could find it. It might not actually be there. It might have been one of the mill authors out there that's on Facebook. But I seem to remember there was a short comic where it's a PAO unit that's out in the field, and there's a mortar shell that drops right in the middle of a camp, with all these soldiers standing around. And then there's one guy that's labeled PAO that's out there, and he's got his finger on his chin, and he's got a blowhorn in the other hand. In the next panel, he actually shouts to this ISIS group and basically says, "I'm going to need you to take this back and fire it just a little bit down ways. This won't look good on the front page." And I'm just imagining an actual public affairs unit that would actually do something like that. The story doesn't look good, so we're not going to publish it. But on the same token, we want to take every single thing that happens, actually, in some cases, and public news media is especially bad with this. We want to take everything that happens, and you and I have talked about this at countless presentations. They want to take everything that happens and make it out to be the worst thing that's ever happened. I think a few times we've talked about how, you have things like the World War II battles, or the World War I battles, or Civil War battles, where you have battles that are basically taking thousands upon thousands of lives, juxtaposed to the one bomb blast in Iraq last week. And it's those battles that are buried, 2 pages into the paper, but that bomb blast in Iraq ends up on the front page every time. So it's very interesting how we've changed the dynamic of how certain information is actually reported, but what concerns me with that is how it might impact historians in the future going forward, just because we don't quite have the same standards being taught to historians, and we aren't really teaching it to any of the students who are coming up either, about the importance of digging for information. It's more like, if I Google it and I can't find it on pages 1, 2, or 3, oh darn, it must not be there. But for example, like Kevin and I will actually spend a lot of time going through like entire editions of newspapers. So it's a very different dynamic that we're in now. But to circle back to this, fact checking in historical media. Gallipoli. That's the only response that I have to that. Do you have anything else, Kev?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's hard, and I'm sure most everybody listening here gets that, but it's hard being a historian and watching any Hollywood movie, depicting any kind of history, because it's like, well, maybe 2% of that was accurate, and but you try to do your best to separate your historian side from the side that's just taking the enjoyment factor, I guess. But yeah, and then it's, especially if it's a Hollywood movie being made off of a written account or a written book, and you kind of see where they've taken liberties and well, the original story isn't all that exciting, and so we're gonna throw a sex scene in here, and a car chase, and all these other things that have nothing to do with it or relevance to it, and You know, just to try to make it slightly more exciting. And I guess it's a compromise that they have to do, but you know, it's unfortunate for those of us that actually want to try to see, you know, some sort of history get out there, you know, to have 10% of that actually get sucked up or soaked up by the general population to, you know, to learn something out of this, and instead of saying, oh yeah, you know, didn't you know the aliens came down in Gettysburg, or, you know, I mean, some random thing like that.
Right. Or the fact that apparently Jason Hartnett was an actual USAF pilot that was actually in Britain, that was flying USAF fighters in 1940.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Which,
didn't you know?
And the greatest thing about that too, Pearl Harbor is a fine example, and that's one that always gets me going. And we could probably make a whole episode about bitching and moaning about Pearl Harbor, that movie. But the one thing that gets me, because you mentioned the random sex scene, how do you need filler for Pearl Harbor?
Yeah.
Like, how is there not enough? How is there not enough material for Pearl Harbor?
Well, in my one of my previous jobs, we actually had a relic in the museum I worked in that related to Doolittle. So we had a whole, you know, Doolittle display up and everything. And I can't tell you how many times they, you know, people would come in and say, "Oh, well, you know, who were the pilots, the Doolittle Raiders that, you know, served or that, you know, got up in during Pearl Harbor?" It's like, no. Just try to, you know, even Google is going to help you more than Pearl Harbor,
right?
You know, I mean, you know, that people take it for the gospel that's actually what happened, or, you know, that a random parachute shed was a good place to have that sex scene,
right?
You know, in Pearl Harbor. But yeah, I mean, and I get it. I guess that, you know, only, you know, 60-year-old, you know, guys are going to go and watch a movie, or, you know, even a good Hollywood movie about Pearl Harbor, you know, that doesn't have, you know, all these bits and pieces that, you know, you think that everybody would, or make it a movie for everybody, I guess.
You know, take the kids down. You know, it's just one dude with his leg blown off, and you know, carnage, sex, carnage. Lots of drinking, more carnage. There's probably some angry German in there somewhere, because there always is. Yeah, no. I totally get that, but it's one of those things where people would defend some of these. Well, it's a special effects wonder. Well, yeah, but is it though? I mean,
you mean the special effects with the Aegis cruisers?
Yeah, right.
In Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, yes. That was fantastic too. The other thing that also always got me about Pearl Harbor is that the radar signatures that they were showing, you could actually tell by the shape of the radar signatures that they belong to F-14s if you knew how to read a radar scope. So, yeah, it's like, okay. See, this is why you don't take historians to movie theaters, guys.
Yeah.
Yes.
You hear a whole lot of sighing, and come on.
Oh, okay. So we could talk about the theoretical history stuff now too, because I mentioned the F-14s, and I just got a text. So I'm supposed to bring up Final Countdown. For those of you who don't know what Final Countdown is, Kevin, you might not know what Final Countdown is. Do you?
I've heard of it. I don't think I've watched it.
Okay, so Final Countdown is an alternative history sci-fi movie in which there is a task force that launches, or no, it's actually a whole carrier strike group that gets sucked into like this wormhole, and they've got F-14 scrambled in the air. And these F-14s come upon a Japanese strike group. Well, it's actually...
Oh, I have seen that.
Yeah, it's the Japanese strike group for Pearl Harbor, and they're like having a moral dilemma as to whether or not they should take them down. It's so see that leads another interesting component to some of these, though. What's the trade-off? And I actually grapple with this just on my own on a regular basis. So what is the trade-off? Where do you draw the line between, hey, it's wrong, but it's okay. Why is it okay? Because it's getting people interested and starting having a conversation. Maybe they'll dig in and learn more. Versus, oh wow, people are just taking this at face value, and now all of a sudden, Jeanne d'Arc was transported by wormhole to West Virginia in the 19th century, was somehow involved with the Mark 8 tank and the population of West Virginia, and is somehow connected to the nuclear detonations in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Excuse me, what? That was a Bob joke.
Yeah.
So, but where is that line? I guess.
And I suppose you're right, Mark. Is that I mean, for his, one of the, I guess, the classics is Gettysburg, and when it came out, I saw it in theaters, so I know, Mark, that was before your time. But
movie theaters, what's that?
Yes. Well, it's going to be before everybody's time now.
Yeah, right.
But I went saw Gettysburg in the movie theater, and that got me so interested and deep into history, or into Civil War history, that I started studying it. And so, even if, as much as we want to criticize, the movies, that it might spark that little interest to get somebody to take that next step. And I mean, I think, Mark, you were aware of it, or the Facebook group, the History Channel sucks. And while not a movie, it's like everybody's knocked on the History Channel since they've left history and started going to Ancient Aliens and things like that. But there was a lot of comments, even before they started doing that, about some of their docudramas or their history shows, and how they even strayed from accuracy at times, or their little made for TV movies about history.
The Hitler Channel.
And, yeah, the Hitler Channel. Yeah, Finding Hitler, like now.
Right.
Their new
Dark Side of the Moon, man. Dark Side of the Moon. He's up there with Pink Floyd right now.
Yeah, but I guess at least if it's somewhat entertaining, and gets somebody to hopefully take that next step. But I don't know. I guess that's talking from a guy who did take that next step and actually started reading about it. So at Gettysburg, that is.
In this community, there's a lot of fans of the Fate series, and see Tomaso's here, and Tomaso is a big Yojo Senki fan. Both of these are animes, mind you, and I cannot count how many times I have bitched and moaned and gotten extremely upset at people because they come in thinking that the Fate series, and don't you dare Google that, you will be extremely sorry if you do, Kev. Don't do it. Don't go down that rabbit hole. It's not good. It's not good for you. Don't do it. But thinking for some reason that that's how it's supposed to be. I'm sorry, but I'm just going to tell you, King Arthur, not a woman. Never was a woman. Never going to be a woman. King Arthur. Sorry. Oda Nobunaga, not a woman. Sorry. We know better. We know. But it gets the conversation started, is what it's all about. But the problem is, shut up, Pico. The problem is that, what is the percentage? What is the percentage of conversion from those individuals that see this? They're just like, that's very interesting. I want to know more. I want to know exactly what it's all about. And actually will go and look for that outside of that circle. And I'm starting to think that percentage might be a little bit higher than I thought it was, but still entirely too low for the sake of everybody's educational health or academic health. Mainly because, there's still people running around insisting that, Nero may not have been that bad. Nero was terrible. Nero was... Kevin, you didn't even study that era. I'm pretty sure Nero was bad.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting to see those kinds of things, to see those little nuances and how many people pick up on it and how many people don't pick up on it. And unfortunately, it's still far too many that don't pick up on it and just run with it. But we have media to thank for that, unfortunately. And of course, now we live in an age where you can post anything you want online. And yeah,
I have to put just a funny thought in there, Mark, because all Romans speak in a British accent, right?
That's right. That's right. It's one of my other pet peeves that I've always had too. So, wait, we're supposed to be fighting the Prussians right now? Oh, that dude just yelled at me in a Brooklyn accent. So, not Prussian, pretty sure. And I know what the argument is there too. People will make the argument, well, people want to be able to understand the characters and things like that. Yeah, that's fine. But if you're trying to do a movie where you're trying to be factual, or at least have some semblance of factual background, go ahead and do this. Make the home team, make them understandable. So I'll pick Bonnie's war that she's dealing with right now. So the Russo-Japanese War. Okay? If you're looking at this from the side of the Russians and you're trying to make the Russians out to be the okay side that you're going to follow, make the Russians speak English, the Japanese should be speaking Japanese. And you should be just as confused as the Russians are when they're trying to get information out of the Japanese. That's my mindset for that. I don't know about everybody else's. But, and if you're looking at it from, we'll just say the German side. The Germans do a movie about the war. Then the Russians should be speaking German and the Japanese should be speaking Japanese.
And that was actually, I had read an opinion piece about the movie Valkyrie.
Yeah.
Where, with, granted, it's got Tom Cruise in it, which already puts it at a negative there. But, I didn't think it was all that terrible of a movie. But, the first, I don't know, it was 2 minutes that he's speaking German. It's subtitled in German. And it was said that, the original plan for Valkyrie was it was going to all be in German and then subtitled. But they felt that they would lose probably 60% of the audience because they had to read. Not that they couldn't read, but that they would lose interest because they had to read.
Right. By the way, be careful.
Come on.
Be careful. A DC-8 is going to come out of the sky and crash on your house.
Yeah.
That's Scientology, man.
Yeah, exactly.
But, that argument doesn't necessarily hold water. You look at the opposite side. We're talking about parallel history here. You look at something like Inglourious Basterds. That movie did fine. I mean, that movie did fine at the box office. It didn't try to market itself as factual. It tried to market itself as, this is an interesting take. But it didn't have any issues. Another movie that comes to mind is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So I think they probably could have pushed the envelope maybe a little bit better. And there's enough rabid Tom Cruise fans out there. I'm sure they would have done just fine at the box office without that little worry. My opinion, anyway. But
yeah,
what do I know? I'm just a guy on the internet.
Well, yeah, everything on the internet is true, isn't it?
Well, and that's another thing too, is that we're dealing with that on a near daily basis as well. So we're always dealing with armchair historians, and I guess everybody's dealing with that in a certain degree in their field. So right now, the big punchline that a lot of people are dealing with is medical profession. There's a lot of armchair doctors now for some reason because of the COVID vaccine. So, but that's another thing that we're dealing with a lot of now is people doctoring images, doctoring footage, and where I see a lot of this, where I see a lot of falsities is, once again, it's the Confederate historians. The Confederate sympathizing historians. So it's been weird, to say the least, when you're watching the Twitter storians, which ones are actually siding with the Confederates, and which ones, like, there's some people that'll just start frothing at the mouth if you bring up Sherman. It's the damnedest thing. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. But they will, they act like they are like totally woke and triggered if you mention Sherman's name. Tomaso says here, in a way that's dumb, but knowing that some people put out bad subs, I would not be surprised about subtitles being a problem. Yeah, I suppose that's true. But if you have the budget for a film like Valkyrie, I'm guessing that you can probably hire a pretty competent translator. I'm guessing. But there I go thinking again.
They had to pay Tom Cruise, so they cut back.
Yeah, you know, that was the... Oh, oh, really? Someone used a strategy video game map painting simulator to propagate the clean Wehrmacht myth. Really? I did not know that. That's some BS there. But this thing of the thing of alternate history, though, is that there are some people who are extremely susceptible to taking that at face value, and it's very strange when you encounter one of these individuals, and I've encountered a few of them, and they are some of the most intense people I think I've ever encountered, either face to face or, you know, over the internet. Dave was one of those. I'll just throw it out there. That individual was one of those. And I would hear about alternative takes to history all the time that were preached to me as if they were factual. Let alone the fact that they were talking about, you know, my area of expertise. One of them that was my favorite was the fact in the idea that Project Pluto was completed, and we actually have a few of them that are flying around right now. That was my favorite. Those of you who don't know what Project Pluto is, by the way, that is a constantly flying thermonuclear-tipped nuclear reactor-powered cruise missile that never runs out of energy, and once it jettisons its thermonuclear payload, the reactor goes into meltdown, and it keeps flying over a populated airspace until it eventually dies. I'm pretty sure we don't have any of those. 99% sure. But unfortunately, it doesn't stop anybody from thinking that, right? And really and truly, and we've talked about this too, chat, is it gets down to the point to where history spawns conspiracy. We talked about that a little bit last week during our B2 presentation, and Hollywood ran with that Aurora program. They ran and ran and ran. So much so that there's 3 movies out there right now that are about the program, have did no research into it whatsoever. Up to and including the new Top Gun movie. Which Tom Cruise strikes again, Kevin.
Yes.
So, history and media can be a very dangerous, dangerous thing. That's for sure. But one of the other problems that I have written down here is how media depicts ongoing issues and how historians might have a skewed perception due to how media reports today. So the big punchline anymore has been, I'm going to use this word. I'm sorry, chat, but I don't know another term for it. Fake news. Oh, or alternative news, or information that is not necessarily true to facts. And we do seem to have a lot of error in news reporting these days. But what I've noticed, there is an increase in the lack of corrections published by media when they get a piece of information wrong. They leave that up to the quote-unquote, and these are air quotes, fact checkers, independent fact checkers. We're not leaving it up to actual sources at this point. And we're depending on news outlets to be our source. So I don't know what I think about that. Kev, what are your thoughts on that? Because I'm honestly very interested in how social historians and historians without access might actually get the full picture, because I'm not sure exactly how they would, outside of trying to get a hold of actual data that may not be available.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's going to be an interesting study back, and I think that just like anything now, you have different facets of historians, and I belong to an archivist group on Facebook, and they're talking about, well, hey, archiving Facebook chats and Facebook memes and engagements and interactions, and I think that it's going to be tough in the future. The historians are just going to be drowned in sources, and then doing that same thing is like fact checking is going to be insane, because what are your sources, and even with fact checkers, it's there's even bias or discussion about some of these fact checkers, what side or who are they being paid on, and they're going to tell you what facts they believe in, and so it's going to be a challenge, I think, for historians in the future to look back on this time and try to have some discernible middle ground history as to what actually did occur. But I don't envy that, in a lot of ways, just for the overload of material that you'd have to source material that you'd have to wade through to try to figure it out yourself.
And I think go ahead.
Well, it was funny because in one of my graduate classes, I say that, and then I realized that one of my graduate classes, I did a undergraduate coursework where basically you're a TA for a entry level history course, and the professor was teaching 9/11, and it's like, well, she said, well, some of you were either very young babies, or you weren't alive yet, for 9/11, and it's like, holy shoot.
Yeah.
Now I feel really old, where it's you live through that history, and it's something that's it's going to have its own slant for how you remember it too. But I don't think that even at that time at 9/11 we weren't overwhelmed with source material that we are today.
Right. And I think one of the things that you have to think about too when you're thinking about stuff like this is it's getting extremely difficult to block out the noise. And when I say the noise, I'm talking about conspiracy theorists, opinion pieces, people that are sharing an idea that's just an idea. It used to be that was very, very clearly labeled. In fact, there's a couple of examples on the website. One of them that's my favorite is the fact that we were using a tank that is on an island in the middle of the Mississippi River that's just downstream from us, that we were going to use that to invade a neighboring city because we were sick and tired of their hooligans, quote unquote, coming over to our side of the river. But it was very clear when it was satire. It was very clear when it was an opinion piece. It was very clear when it was, an idea or an opinion that didn't have that, that backing to it. But anymore, and I've made comments of this before too, is that we are in a place and time where Trevor Noah in The Daily Show and Jimmy Kimmel are for some reason news outlets. They're worthy of news. What they say in their material is worthy of breaking news, and it's a source and it's valid. They're satire shows. They're comedy shows. That's what they're supposed to be. They're not supposed to have hot takes. That's not the intention of these programs. And not a day goes by where I don't see Jimmy Kimmel in my freaking newsfeed. My actual newsfeed that's pulling stories from around the internet. Not a day goes by, and I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me, because to me, that is not a news source. That is an entertainment source, not factual. There should be no reason that NBC or CNN is writing up, we got this news from Jimmy Kimmel. Well, Jimmy Kimmel is a comedian. His creed to fame was being on a comedy show that was particularly scandalous. I'll let you Google that to figure it out, because I won't bring it up here. But these are not individuals who are credible news sources. Just like people would always cite David Halberstam during the Vietnam War as a factual historical source. David Halberstam is not a historian. He is a media personality that did a series of write-ups. He has authority in that he was there. He doesn't have authority in being able to put all the pieces together. That's a lot of the problem, and that's one of the biggest problems I have with people using Halberstam as a source when talking about military history. If anything, he fits in the social history component.
Well, in that same sense, the Onion and the Duffel blog. I mean, their intended purpose is to be satire, and I can't tell you how many times that the number of years how the people would ask me about an article in the Duffel blog, and they didn't know what the Duffel blog was, and it's like, is this true? Like, no, and it's, but it so easily fools people today. I mean, an article loses context 20 years down the road, and all of a sudden now it's fact, and this is what actually happened. And like you said there, talking about the fact checkers getting them the most likes, and that's really what it is. It's like, well, it doesn't really matter in a lot of cases what's initially published. If it gets a if it bleeds, it leads headline, that they can always retract it. I was mistaken, but the retraction doesn't get, well, in talking about a newspaper analogy, the fact check or the retraction gets put on page 20, as opposed to the first page story that it originally got put on. Or it gets in a digital context, it gets put on 30 pages down in a Reddit
subreddit, yeah,
discussion, as opposed to, well, the headline got all these people talking and all these subreddits going, and it's like, well, yeah, but the original premise was wrong. So
it reminds me of the South Park episode to where they're like trying to outrun ads, and one of the ads like takes on human form and becomes like one of the classmates, I think. And like there's a whole bunch of like ads that are popping up on the internet that look like news stories, and then there's like an ad embedded inside. But it kind of reminds me of that. It's just that this is what I think the point was there, and I kind of see it in the world around us now, is that it's getting harder and harder to tell what is real and what is not. So I don't envy historians that are going to be looking at like the COVID era or the 2016 elections or even the 2012 elections, or any of the subsequent freakouts that happened about the 2012 phenomena, which there's scholars right now that are looking through data with that and putting all that stuff together, which, oh boy. But I don't envy that scholar. I don't envy a social historian that's going to be looking at the 21st century at all. I don't even really envy, professional historians that are looking at it from many other perspectives either. You and I have had discussions about problems with military history, and that we actually have to wade through about 300 pages of hearing about, Tom winning a cubicle decorating contest in the history submissions that we receive. That's not history. That is not important. I need to know things. I need to know. Great. So Tom wins the freaking cubicle contest. Meanwhile, we're doing X, Y, and Z, and I don't know about it because I have to filter through 300 pages of your stuff. So it has to do with information overload, right? Is that we have so much ability to produce information that we aren't even paying attention anymore to what that information is. We're just making it.
Well, and to go back to like Kasumi said too, is my Peter Griffin moment that really grinds my gears, is that reading even modern day articles about history or just about anything, and you get into the article and it's been plainly obvious that nobody actually gave this a second read. Somebody was typing it out on their phone and then posted it as a news story, and within the first sentence, or there's a incorrect spelling or grammar in the title, or in the first paragraph of the news story. And it's like, when I start seeing how there's no edit, or no editor has looked at this, that whoever did it just posted it straight from their phone and didn't care, for any of the minor issues that go into it. It makes me feel like they lose credibility in this, and I start losing interest in going and read another article that is properly edited, because if they didn't take the time to even edit it, they obviously did not take the time to fact check it or to get sources.
Right.
So it's like, how much validity is there behind this?
And you see that even in larger sources too, like CNN, like MSNBC, and all these other places. There's no quality assurance check anymore, because we got to get it out first. But the problem is getting it out first doesn't mean getting it out the right way. It means getting it out first and risk being wrong. But then by that time, we're in a society now that makes snap decisions. And we formulate opinions on shorter sentences and shorter sections of text. Why is that? Well, we could get into a psychological debate about that. I don't think we'll do it. I will just flat out say that I blame Twitter. Twitter, in my mind, is part of the reason that people will take a block of text and that's all I need to know about this. Well, why? Because it's the 155 character word or word limit that Twitter has. So that's all the information I need to know, right? No, that's not true. But it's one of the things too, is that not only are people not editing content, but nobody's reading it. Nobody wants to read it. And so you can have a piece of wrong information there, or a piece of incomplete information there, and people are just going to run with it. And then it becomes harder and harder and harder and harder to curb that information and get the correct information put out. And we've seen it a number of different times, even recently. It's an unfortunate thing, for sure. Chat, my dear chat, do you have other questions for us? Other questions, chat? I know. Going behind the psyche of the mentality and culture today's society is based around is quite frankly disturbing on so many levels. Boy, that's... Yeah, we could have a whole series on that. But we're going to have a lot of alcohol. And we're probably all going to have to be in the same room. Because otherwise we'll all just be talking over each other over Discord. Because, yeah, that's a...
And no recordings.
Yeah,
no proof.
That's right, no proof. Turn off the VODs. Pico's thanking you for being on, Kevin. Pico's one of my head mods.
Thanks. I appreciate the invitation to be here.
Yeah.
And I'm always, any chance that I get to talk a little bit of history, I'm always happy to do it.
So I will kind of remind chat of this as well. So if it were not for the individual on the other end of this conversation, this channel and this program probably wouldn't be here, even though this is the first time he's appearing on this stream. Mainly because we've been kicking around ideas for... we wanted to be totally unoriginal and rip off drunk history. And we were kicking around the ideas of podcasting. I had suggested Twitch at one point. And this is actually very relevant because I talked about this today. The idea was that Twitch is a video gamer platform. And it might not be necessarily the best platform for it. And I walked back on that really fast. So much so that when I went through my training summits, I actually used history as an example of why there needs to be more education kind of content on Twitch. And I actually reached out to Tattooed Historian for some comments on that, and we got some information off of him, and I was able to incorporate that in too. There's a very, very much an apparent deep pool of individuals on Twitch that are interested in educational content and alternative content. So I think we're in the peak season for Twitch, if you will. But yes, everyone should be thanking Kev, as he's at least half of this idea. He might be a little bit more of this idea because I think he originally came up with it. So
I do what I can to inspire others, such as Mark, without having any technical expertise or knowledge. Know how to do it myself.
I don't know how to do it, so you go figure out how to make it work. Yeah, that's that describes me at least moderately well. Well, I'll accept that. So, technological expertise. So, if it makes you feel any better, Kev, I have actually had to rely on Pico here to help me with almost all of the technological setups and things, integration of Twitch into Discord, and all of that stuff. So I haven't been able to do all of it. I've had to rely on my head moderator here to be able to help me with some of that. So,
oh, thank you, Pico.
I am not immune.
Shepherd Mark well.
I am not immune to being shelled out when it comes to technology. Just ask my car. So, well, it looks like we don't have other questions in chat tonight, which is okay. Chat. This is one of those big topics, and I'm really glad that we steered away from. I'm really glad we steered away from the soapbox that I could have gotten on, because I knew exactly where that soapbox was, and we teetered around it pretty good this evening. And I might actually have to go back in sometime and do a presentation on that, on media in the Vietnam War. We'll see. Kevin, I might have to have you review that to make sure that I'm not stepping too far outside the boundaries of reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. Let's see here real quick. If Tattooed Historian is streaming, we might go and raid him, but I don't think he is. Oh my. Well, he is streaming, actually, so we are going to raid him. But I just saw here that Djibouti Show is literally streaming the YouTube poop episode about It's All Right Here at Your Fingertips. It's about how to use Netscape Navigator in Windows 95.
Useful skills.
Very useful skills. Jeez, that's a historical artifact right there in of itself. Oh, jeez. I will drop that actually in the videos channel in the Discord, just because I think you guys will actually be at least a little entertained by that. Just a little entertained. But yes, that will do it for us this evening, or at least for this particular stream. I streamed 3 more times tonight. Ugh. It's a long evening. Coming up at 8 o'clock, we'll be getting back into this part of the evening. We'll be getting back into Final Fantasy VII Remake. Maybe, if my capture card works? Question mark. Otherwise, we're probably just going to insult people on Oh Sir again. I'm working on an addiction with that game, which, Kev, you and I might have to play that sometime. It's just creating insults to throw at each other. It's great. It's fantastic.
Nice.
And after that, at 10 o'clock, we'll be doing our Jackbox community night. So that's going to be everybody, all hands on deck for that one. We'll be doing a bunch of ridiculous things in Jackbox. So that'll be exciting as always. I can never spell Tattooed Historian's name right. I am a historian and I don't know how to spell. That might be a problem.
That's why we have editors.
Yeah. That's why we have spell check, is the correct answer. But, alright. So I'm going to send you guys on over his way. He's actually going to be talking about, it looks like, the Romanians in World War I and Tannenberg. So, yeah, guys. That'll definitely be a fantastic talk. But, for those of you who are here for the history streams, we'll be back with more history on the 9th of April. We'll be doing the second part to the Spiritual Connection series. We'll be talking about the ATF program and the YF-23 Black Widow. Contrary to what you might believe, the Valkyrie thing down there at the bottom on 4 June is not about the movie Valkyrie that was mentioned during the stream. It is about the program. No Tom Cruise will be appearing in that presentation. Don't worry. But with that, Kevin, been a pleasure. Stick around actually for a few minutes here after I get the stream sent over to Tattooed Historian. We'll talk. And to the rest of you, we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.